Pawns. They're great. Pawns. They're great. No, but seriously. While pawns may be weak on their own, you get 8 of them to start off with. That means you get a lot of them, and they can significantly change the impact and the outcome of the game. There is also a massive difference between weak and strong pawns. And this video will teach you how to convert your pawns from weak to strong, and some things that make a pawn weak and strong. First, we need to define what are weak and strong pawns. A weak pawn is a pawn that is A. has little to no flexibility, B. pose 0 threats, and C. have little to no protection. However, a strong pawn is the exact opposite. A strong pawn is one that poses a massive threat to the other side, is supported by other pieces, and is flexible as well. Let's have a look at some things that make a pawn weak. In this first example, there's an oddity among the pawns. These 2 pawns here are stacked on top of each other. This is something known as a doubled pawn. These pawns are pawns that are stacked right on top of each other, and they have little or practically no flexibility at all. While they can be good in certain situations, usually when the doubled pawns are aiming at the center, they are bad most of the time. And if they last until the end game, which is when there are less major and minor pieces, so in this example there are only 2 pieces for each side, 2 major pieces, these pawns are really not a good thing. They can be easily targeted. For example, in this situation, this rook can come up and over to target the pawns. And this bishop can also target this pawn here quite easily. And as I said before, these have little flexibility. For example, if I wanted this pawn here on b2 to attack the pawn on a6, I would have to move the pawn on b3 first, 3 times, and then the b2 pawn 3 times as well, before I can finally attack this pawn. Compared to a normal pawn, it would just take me 2 moves with the b3 pawn and 2 moves as well for the b2 pawn. However, you still waste a lot of time. Which is why doubled pawns have almost no flexibility. And when the other team targets these pawns, they become a weakness, and you can lose these pawns, which results in you losing material and the other team gaining them. For example, if this bishop moved over here, yeah, sure, I could push, but then this rook would come up and around and target both of these pawns. Then these 2 pawns here that are strong, which we'll cover later, will rampage through and just become 2 queens ultimately, or at least 1. Now on to the second position. Now can you tell me what is a weak pawn in this situation? Which pawns are weak? It's not these 2 pawns, it's not these, and it's not any of these. It's these 2 pawns. These are weak because they have absolutely no flexibility. They cannot move to any square beyond this point. They cannot move to any square beyond these points. This means they can also be targeted very easily and need a defender next to them, which also means one other piece that has to be committed to defending this pawn. That's why these pawns are super weak. 9 times out of 10, these are very horrible. The only time I can think of them being a good thing is when the black king or the opponent king is open, which means these pawns can't help, pretty much. Therefore, these pawns are super weak. Now let's move on to the third position. Now, like doubled pawns, tripled pawns are also a thing. However, while doubled pawns can be a good thing 2 times out of 10, these are absolutely horrible to have. Not only are they super weak, can be targeted very easily, they have absolutely zero flexibility, and it also leaves a major gap for your team. What I mean by this is that if you look at these 3 pawns, if I were to remove this pawn here, these 3 pawns over here that are tripled would become a pawn island. This is when there are no surrounding pawns to help them or support them. And this is because they're all stacked up on top of each other. These pawns are absolutely useless, and they need constant defenders, which means another 3 pieces dedicated to these 3 pawns. And the reason why you can't just sacrifice them is because 3 pawns have a really big impact on the outcome of a game. 3 pawns is the same amount of material as 1 bishop or a knight, and a bishop or a knight can change the game. Therefore, these pawns are horrendous, and you should never, ever even think about having these in your game. Now let's move on to some things that make a pawn strong. Let's look at this example. Now, while I did say that pawn islands are not a good thing, in this rare scenario, this pawn is a strong pawn. Why? Because it's a passed pawn. I've already said this earlier, but if you don't know, a passed pawn is a pawn that does not have a pawn in front of it, thus blocking the passed pawn. So this means in this scenario, there are 0 pawns to come in front of the b4 pawn, which means it can go all the way to the other side of the board without needing to worry about being threatened. And another reason why this pawn is strong is because it has a defender. This pawn is defended by the bishop, and so is the pawn on this square. Any of other black's pieces can't really get to this pawn here, except for the knight, but we can trade that off immediately with check as well. And wherever black moves, we're just gonna push, and ultimately make a queen. This is why this pawn was so strong. While it may have been isolated, it still has a major advantage and can turn the tides of the game. Now let's look at an even stronger type of pawn. These 2 pawns are connected passed pawns. Unlike the previous example where each of these pawns had no other pawn to protect it, these 2 have each other to protect them, and they are also passed. There are no pawns opposing them, they can both defend each other, and that means they can ultimately pose a massive threat. In fact, they pose an even bigger threat in this scenario, because this rook is preventing the black king from ever crossing this line, thus making it impossible for it to come and target these pawns. This knight isn't really much of an issue, as it can easily be taken care of because of the other knight and the bishop, and these pawns pose zero threats at all. Since it's check, we just move the king, and then wherever, let's say black decides to take this pawn on h3, we can just come and basically storm through and make a queen. One of these two pawns will make a queen. That's almost guaranteed. So now that you've learned about good pawns versus bad pawns, it's time you implement this knowledge into your chess games. Write down your top learning in the comment box below. I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye!